The day is in the midst of a year-long look at affordable housing in the region. What specifically do you think the legislature should do to help people who can't afford to buy a home or are struggling to rent an apartment?
Well, I think that when you look at affordable housing in Connecticut, and in the 23rd District in particular, there's two parts of it. The first part of it is that everyone in our community should be able to live in our community. Always struck me as jarring when we were working on coming out of COVID, and we would see signs in windows saying, "Thank you for your heroes, thank you for the grocery store workers, thank you for all these people," but then they couldn't afford to live here. That, to me, there was always a disconnect there. So I think that affordable housing is something that is good for all of our communities. The second thing is it is a tremendous economic issue. If you take a look at what businesses need and what businesses are saying they need from Connecticut, right now it's workers. There's a workforce shortage. And it's a reality that if you can't afford to live near your job, you're not going to take that job. So it gets to be a real drag on our economic potential. So with that in mind, I think that it does require a statewide effort to, make affordable housing more achievable for people in the 23rd District and in Connecticut in general. That doesn't mean that the towns also shouldn't be involved. I served on a zoning board in Old Saybrook for several years, and I've seen when 830G applications come in, and in my opinion, having served on the zoning board and lived in town, it's a tool that isn't doing its job. I think it was probably well-intentioned when it was passed, but ultimately it hasn't solved the crisis, and it generally meets a lot of resistance from the local community who feel that their traditional zoning authority has been taken away. So to that end, I think that the legislature needs to develop a framework where we can find a way to work with towns and with communities to fill what their needs are as far as affordable housing goes, because they're not all the same. A town, like a town in the 23rd, might need workforce housing, might need retiree housing, might need housing for young families looking to come live there. That could be very different than what a city like Hartford or Bridgeport or New Haven needs in terms of what their affordable housing needs are, or a city that needs true homelessness reduction or things like that, that might not really be a pressing issue in a town in the 23rd. So if you listen to the towns and you work with the towns, you're going to be able to get more buy-in and ultimately a better success rate.
Connecticut recently enacted a law designed to provide safeguards against lawsuits for out-of-state patients seeking abortions in Connecticut and any provider who helps them. Do you support efforts to make Connecticut such a safe haven?
I 100% support efforts to make Connecticut such a safe haven, and it pains me to say that my opponent voted against that bill. Abortion rights are fundamental rights. It's women's health. It is something that for a very long time in this country was a backbone of a woman's ability to choose her own destiny. Reproductive rights are a huge part of that. And I would 100% that bill and would support strengthening it even further. The idea that a person who came here from a vulnerable state would then be turned over and prosecuted back in that home state for having an abortion here is reprehensible to me. And that's not who we are in the 23rd. I don't think that's who we are in Connecticut, and I would do everything I could to strengthen abortion rights.
The state's surplus has grown to over $4 billion. Do you support the decision to use some of that to lower the state's pension debt, or do you think more should be returned to the taxpayer?
I support the decision to lower the pension debt, and I can understand the idea of saying, hey, if we have a surplus, that means you're taking too much out of our pockets and you should give it back. I can recognize that as being, a well-held and sincerely thought belief. However, if you take a look at why we have that surplus. It was the result of years of yo-yo budgeting. We'd have a surplus, we'd have a deficit. Things were unstable. We didn't know how we were going to meet our needs. So when they passed the bipartisan budget in 2017, we said, hey, no, we're going to shore up our rainy day fund, and we're going to make it so that that's always going to be there. And this is the first step towards that. You don't abandon that well thought out plan the moment you have a little bit of extra money in your pocket, because it's there so that when a unforeseen event happens, another pandemic, a natural disaster, we have the money to be able to confront it without having to go deeper into debt and hurt our bond rating. You also take a look at what businesses want, and you'll hear a lot from Republicans about how businesses want tax cut and lower regulations, and that's true, they often do. But what businesses really want and what employers really want is stability. They want to be able to say that this is going to be a stable environment for me to invest my dollars in. I don't want to worry about the state's fiscal house not being in order. And controlling our pension, paying down that liability, increasing our bond rating is a huge part of that stability. So in order to find ourselves in a situation where we can be stable, we need to save money when we have it for that event that comes when we don't. So I can appreciate everyone wanting more money in their pocket, myself included. In the grand scheme of things, and the more future-looking outlook is, no, we need to have that rainy day fund, and we need to pay down our liabilities.
How should Connecticut move forward to address climate change with regards to electric vehicles, wind power, and other clean energy strategies?
Climate change and in vehicles and wind power are related in that if you take a look at the climate change and environment, there's really three parts of it. There is the short-term, the middle-term, and the long-term goals. The short-term goals are, in the 23rd, we have 3 of the 4 towns in the 23rd are on Long Island Sound. So we're going to bear the brunt of climate change immediately. Sea level rise, more severe weather, that's all going to hit us. So we need to have a climate change policy that recognizes that and builds up our infrastructure so that we can handle flooding, we can handle big storms, we can handle these events that are the immediate impact of climate change. We also need to realize the causes of climate change. One of the causes certainly is transportation pollution. So we need to begin to transition to a cleaner way of transporting. The 23rd is not entirely, but largely a commuter district. We have people traveling to Hartford, to New Haven, to Groton and New London for work centers, and then coming to live in the community. So there is a lot of driving, and we use a lot of transportation. So we need to think about what we can do to transition into a greener way of transporting ourselves. Now, not everyone can afford an electric vehicle. They're expensive, and you're getting rid of a personally functioning vehicle that's maybe already been paid for. So in order to do that, you need to incentivize that. You need to build the network. You need to show people that they can get out of that vehicle and into something better. And that's a mid-range issue. That also applies to things like solar power in your house, geothermal heating, all those sorts of things. That's the mid-range issue. The long-range issue is our bigger electric grid. Right now, our electricity is provided by primarily natural gas with a little bit of nuclear thrown in. We need to transition out of that. That's going to take more time, more planning, and more study. But you have to address all 3 of those issues at the same time. We're not going to be able to change our electric grid overnight, but we do need to put the seeds in the ground so that we can do so in the future.
Do you think the 2020 election was conducted fairly and Joe Biden won? And do you support early voting and voting by mail initiatives?
Yes, I think the election in 2020 was conducted fairly. I think that Joe Biden won. I do support early voting and mail-in ballot initiatives. I also would support making Election Day a holiday. I think that if we want people to participate in democracy, we need to make it as easy as possible for them to do so. The election fraud claims are largely unfounded or overstated, and I think that to move our democracy forward, we need more involvement, not less.
Several beach areas in Old Lyme are under consent orders to address pollution issues stemming from septic systems. Do you believe putting sewers in Miami Beach, Old Colony, Old Lyme Shores, and Sound View is the answer to the problem? And how will you work to secure funding to make the project financially viable for the residents that will bear the cost?
I was at the latest unveiling of the plans to move forward last month at the Old Lyme High School. And what I saw were local communities that were invested in finding a solution. Ultimately, as a state representative, my job would be to listen to them as to what they think is going to work for their community and then help them receive the resources to do so. What I saw at that meeting was, sure, there was some disagreement of how to proceed, but I did see, and it was warming to see, everyone involved thought they were doing the right thing. They all thought that they were trying to come to an answer to the problem. So what we need to do as a state legislator is to support them, to find a way that we can help them get the resources they need. Because Long Island Sound is all of our resource. It's all of our problem, it's all of our resource, and we need to find a way to have that solution happen. A clean sound benefits everyone in the state of Connecticut, and I would do everything I could to help get the resources to make a clean sound.